a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf is a 1925 autobiographical book by Nazi Party leader Adolf Hitler. The work describes the process by which Hitler became anti-Semitic and outlines his political ideology and future plans for Germany. Volume 1 of Mein Kampf was published in 1925 and Volume 2 in 1926. The book was edited by Hitler's deputy Rudolf Hess. Hitler began Mein Kampf while imprisoned for what he considered to be political crimes. Following his failed putsch in Munich in November 1923, although Hitler received many visitors initially, he soon devoted himself entirely to the book. As he continued, Hitler realized that it would have to be a two-volume work, with the first volume scheduled for release in early 1925. The governor of Landsberg noted at the time that he, Hitler, hopes the book will run into many editions, thus enabling him to fulfill his financial obligations and to defray the expenses incurred at the time of his trial. The book was a bestseller in Germany during the 1930s. After Hitler's death, copyright of Mein Kampf passed to the state government of Bavaria, which refused to allow any copying or printing of the book in Germany. In 2016, following the expiry of the copyright held by the Bavarian state government, Mein Kampf was republished in Germany for the first time since 1945, which prompted public debate and divided reactions from Jewish groups. Title: Hitler originally wanted to call his forthcoming book Viereinhalb Jahre gegen Lüge, Damit und Fate, or 4.5 Years Against Lies, Stupidity, and Cowardice. Max Amann, head of the Franzia Verlag and Hitler's publisher, is said to have suggested the much shorter Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. Analysis. In Mein Kampf, Hitler used the main thesis of the Jewish peril, which posits a Jewish conspiracy to gain world leadership. The narrative describes the process by which he became increasingly anti-Semitic and militaristic, especially during his years in Vienna. He speaks of not having met a Jew until he arrived in Vienna, and that at first his attitude was liberal and tolerant. When he first encountered the anti-Semitic press, he says, he dismissed it as unworthy of serious consideration. Later he accepted the same anti-Semitic views, which became crucial to his program of national reconstruction of Germany. Mein Kampf has also been studied as a work on political theory. For example, Hitler announces his hatred of what he believed to be the world's two evils, communism and Judaism. In the book, Hitler blamed Germany's chief woes on the parliament of the Weimar Republic, the Jews, and Social Democrats, as well as Marxists, though he believed that Marxists, Social Democrats, and the parliament were all working for Jewish interests. He announced that he wanted to completely destroy the parliamentary system, believing it to be corrupt in principle, as those who reach power are inherent opportunists. Antisemitism. While historians dispute the exact date Hitler decided to force the Jewish people to emigrate to Madagascar, few place the decision before the mid-1930s. First published in 1925, Mein Kampf shows Hitler's personal grievances and his ambitions for creating a new order. The historian Ian Kershaw points out that several passages in Mein Kampf are undeniably of a genocidal nature. Hitler wrote, "The nationalization of our masses will succeed only when, aside from all the positive struggle for the soul of our people, their international poisoners are exterminated," and he suggested that if at the beginning of the war and during the war 12 or 15,000 of these Hebrew corruptors of the nation had been subjected to poison gas, such as had to be endured in the field by hundreds of thousands of our very best German workers of all classes and professions, then the sacrifice of millions at the front would not have been in vain. The racial laws to which Hitler referred resonate directly with his ideas in Mein Kampf. In the first edition of Mein Kampf, Hitler stated that the destruction of the weak and sick is far more humane than their protection. Apart from this allusion to humane treatment, Hitler saw a purpose in destroying the weak, in order to provide the proper space and purity for the strong. Lebensraum, living space. In the chapter, Eastern orientation or Eastern policy. Hitler argued that the Germans needed Lebensraum in the East, a historic destiny that would properly nurture the German people. Hitler believed that the organization of a Russian state formation was not the result of the political abilities of the Slavs in Russia, but only a wonderful example of the state-forming efficacy of the German element in an inferior race. In Mein Kampf, Hitler openly stated the future German expansion in the East, foreshadowing Generalplan Ost. Popularity. Although Hitler originally wrote Mein Kampf mostly for the followers of National Socialism, it grew in popularity after he rose to power. Hitler had made about 1.2 million Reichsmarks from the income of the book by 1933, when the average annual income of a teacher was about 4,800 marks. He accumulated a tax debt of 405,500 Reichsmark from the sale of about 240,000 copies before he became Chancellor in 1933. Hitler began to distance himself from the book after becoming Chancellor of Germany in 1933. He dismissed it as fantasies behind bars that were little more than a series of articles for the Völkische Beobachter, and later told Hans Frank that, if I had had any idea in 1924 that I would have become Reich Chancellor, I never would have written the book. Nevertheless, Mein Kampf was a bestseller in Germany during the 1930s. During Hitler's years in power, the book was in high demand in libraries and often reviewed and quoted in other publications. It was given free to every newlywed couple and every soldier fighting at the front. By 1939 it had sold 5.2 million copies in 11 languages. By the end of the war, about 10 million copies of the book had been sold or distributed in Germany. Contemporary observations. Mein Kampf, in essence, lays out the ideological program Hitler established for the German Revolution, by identifying the Jews and Bolsheviks as racially and ideologically inferior and threatening, and Aryans and National Socialists as racially superior and politically progressive. Hitler's revolutionary goals included expulsion of the Jews from Greater Germany and the unification of German peoples into one Greater Germany. Hitler desired to restore German lands to their greatest historical extent, real or imagined. Due to its racist content and the historical effect of Nazism upon Europe during World War II and the Holocaust, it is considered a highly controversial book. Criticism has not come solely from opponents of Nazism. Italian fascist dictator and Nazi ally Benito Mussolini was also critical of the book, saying that it was a boring tome that I have never been able to read, and remarking that Hitler's beliefs, as expressed in the book, were little more than commonplace clichés. The German journalist Konrad Heiden, an early critic of the Nazi Party, observed that the content of Mein Kampf is essentially a political argument with other members of the Nazi Party who had appeared to be Hitler's friends, but whom he was actually denouncing in the book's content, sometimes by not even including references to them. The American literary theorist and philosopher Kenneth Burke wrote a 1939 rhetorical analysis of the work, The Rhetoric of Hitler's Battle, which revealed an underlying message of aggressive intent. American journalist John Gunther said in 1940 that compared to the autobiographies of Leon Trotsky or Henry Adams, Mein Kampf was vapid, vain, rhetorical, diffuse, prolix. But it is a powerful and moving book, the product of great passionate feeling. He suggested that the book exhausted curious German readers, but its ceaseless repetition of the argument left impregnably in their minds, fecund and germinating. In March 1940, British writer George Orwell reviewed a then recently published uncensored translation of Mein Kampf for the New English Weekly. Orwell suggested that the force of Hitler's personality shone through the often clumsy writing, capturing the magnetic allure of Hitler for many Germans. In essence, Orwell notes, Hitler offers only visions of endless struggle and conflict in the creation of a horrible brainless empire that stretches to Afghanistan or thereabouts. He wrote, whereas socialism, and even capitalism in a more grudging way, have said to people I offer you a good time, Hitler has said to them, I offer you struggle, danger, and death, and as a result a whole nation flings itself at his feet. Orwell's review was written in the aftermath of the 1939 Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, when Hitler made peace with Russia after more than a decade of vitriolic rhetoric and threats between the two nations. With the pact in place, Orwell believed England was now facing a risk of Nazi attack, and the UK must not underestimate the appeal of Hitler's ideas. In his 1943 book The Menace of the Herd, Austrian scholar Erich von Quenelt-Ledeen described Hitler's ideas in Mein Kampf and elsewhere as a veritable reductio ad absurdum of progressive thought, and betraying a curious lack of original thought that shows Hitler offered no innovative or original ideas, but was merely a virtuoso of commonplaces which he may or may not repeat in the guise of a new discovery. Hitler's stated aim, Quenelt-Ledeen writes, is to quash individualism in furtherance of political goals. In his The Second World War, published in several volumes in the late 1940s and early 1950s, Winston Churchill wrote that he felt that after Hitler's ascension to power, no other book than Mein Kampf deserved more intensive scrutiny. Later analysis. The critic George Steiner has suggested that Mein Kampf can be seen as one of several books that resulted from the crisis of German culture following Germany's defeat in World War I. Comparable in this respect to the philosopher Ernst Bloch's The Spirit of Utopia, the historian Oswald Spengel's The Decline of the West, the theologian Franz Rosenzweig's The Star of Redemption, and the theologian Karl Barth's The Epistle to the Romans. German publication history. While Hitler was in power, Mein Kampf came to be available in three common editions. The first, the Volksausgabe or People's Edition, featured the original cover on the dust jacket and was navy blue underneath with a gold swastika eagle embossed on the cover. The Hochzeitsausgabe, or Wedding Edition, in a slipcase with the seal of the province embossed in gold onto a parchment-like cover, was given free to marrying couples. In 1940, the Tornister-Ausgabe, or Knapsack Edition, was released. This edition was a compact but unabridged version in a red cover and was released by the post office, available to be sent to loved ones fighting at the front. These three editions combined both volumes into the same book. A special edition was published in 1939 in honor of Hitler's 50th birthday. This edition was known as the Jubiläumsausgabe, or anniversary issue. It came in both dark blue and bright red boards with a gold sword on the cover. This work contained both volumes 1 and 2. It was considered a deluxe version, relative to the smaller and more common Volksausgabe. The book could also be purchased as a 2-volume set during Hitler's rule, and was available in softcover and hardcover. The softcover edition contained the original cover. The hardcover edition had a leather spine with cloth-covered boards. The cover and spine contained an image of 3 brown oak leaves. Dugdale abridgement. The first English translation was an abridgement by Edgar Dugdale, who started work on it in 1931, at the prompting of his wife, Blanche. When he learned that the London publishing firm of Hurst and Blackett had secured the rights to publish an abridgement in the United Kingdom, he offered it for free in April 1933. However, a local Nazi Party representative insisted that the translation be further abridged before publication, so it was held back until the 13th of October 1933, although excerpts were allowed to run in the Times in late July. It was published by Hurst and Blackett as part of the Paternoster Library. In America, Houghton Mifflin secured the rights to the Dugdale abridgment on the 29th of July 1933. The only differences between the American and British versions are that the title was translated My Struggle in the UK and My Battle in America, and that Dugdale is credited as translator in the US edition, while the British version withheld his name. Both Dugdale and his wife were active in the Zionist movement. Blanche was the niece of Lord Balfour, and they wished to avoid publicity. Reynal and Hitchcock translation. Houghton and Mifflin licensed Reynal and Hitchcock the rights to publish a full unexpurgated translation in 1938. The book was translated from the 2 volumes of the first German edition, with notations appended noting any changes made in later editions, which were deemed not as extensive as popularly supposed. The translation, made by a committee from the New School for Social Research headed by Alvin Johnson, was said to have been made with a view to readability rather than in an effort to rigidly reproduce Hitler's sometimes idiosyncratic German form. The text was heavily annotated for an American audience with biographical and historical details derived largely from German sources, as the translators deemed the book a propagandistic essay of a violent partisan, which often warps historical truth and sometimes ignores it completely. The tone of many of these annotations reflected a conscious attempt to provide factual information that constitutes an extensive critique of the original. The book appeared for sale on the 28th of February 1939. Murphy translation. One of the earlier complete English translations of Mein Kampf was by James Murphy in 1939. It was the only English translation approved by Nazi Germany. The version published by Hutchison and Company, in association with Hurst and Blackett, Limited in 1939 of the combined volumes 1 and 2 is profusely illustrated with many full-page drawings and photographs. The opening line, "It has turned out fortunate for me today that destiny appointed Braunau on the inn to be my birthplace," is characteristic of Hitler's sense of destiny that began to develop in the early 1920s. Hurst and Blackett ceased publishing the Murphy translation in 1942 when the original plates were destroyed by German bombing, but it is still published and available in facsimile editions and also on the Internet. Stackpole translation and controversy. The small Pennsylvania firm of Stackpole and Sons released its own unexpurgated translation by William Soskin on the same day as Houghton Mifflin, amid much legal wrangling. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in Houghton Mifflin's favor that June and ordered Stackpole to stop selling their version. But litigation followed for a few more years until the case was finally resolved in September 1941. Among other things, Stackpole argued that Hitler could not have legally transferred his right to a copyright in the United States to Ihr Verlag in 1925, because he was not a citizen of any country. Houghton Mifflin v. Stackpole was a minor landmark in American copyright law, definitively establishing that stateless persons have the same copyright status in the United States that any other foreigner would. In the 3 months that Stackpole's version was available, it sold 12,000 copies. Cranston translation and controversy. Houghton Mifflin's abridged English translation left out some of Hitler's more anti-Semitic and militaristic statements. This motivated Alan Cranston, an American reporter for United Press International in Germany, to publish his own abridged and annotated translation. Cranston believed this version more accurately reflected the contents of the book and Hitler's intentions. In 1939, Cranston was sued by Hitler's publisher for copyright infringement, and a Connecticut judge ruled in Hitler's favor. By the time the publication of Cranston's version was stopped, 500,000 copies had already been sold. Today, the profits and proceeds are given to various charities. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?